We're going to resume our sessions that were really background and context information about Genesis as a whole and that era before we actually start going into the words of Genesis per se, into the text of Genesis. So another topic I want to deal with here is the question about when did creation take place? How old is the Genesis account? When was everything formed? Okay. And this is a question that occupies a lot of people. And there are different approaches and different thoughts, different theories. And they deal with the question of how old is man? How long has man been here? How long have the animals been here? How long has the earth been around? How about the universe? What does Genesis say about that? What does Genesis say about the age of the universe? So out of that, there are several theories. I don't know how many there are in number, but let's just say there are 4 types of theories that deal with the age of the creation story. One of those theories is of the young earth, meaning the earth is actually very young. And the earth is very young because mankind is very young. And if mankind is very young, then the earth has to be very young. And the universe itself is very young. Now, that presents several dilemmas, and there's some areas that are hard to mesh and to make them jibe with one another, but that's one theory, the young earth theory, and that really is derived from the belief that the 24 hours in the various days of creation, the 6 days of creation, the 7th day of rest, that those were literal 24-hour days as we know them today. 24 hours, 60 minutes per hour. And that it all took place during successive 24-hour days. So that's one theory, and that really goes into the young earth theory. And then there's another theory that the 24-hour days were not days of creation, rather they were days in which the creation story was revealed or disclosed. So the creation could have been over other periods of time, but the story itself was disclosed on these 24-hour periods. There's another theory, and it's that creation did not take place in 24-hour days over a 6-day period, but rather that was a literary device on which was hung or to which was attached the creation story. So the creation story was framed using languages and time frames with which men were familiar. And then I guess there's another theory at the other end of the scale that the 24-hour days are not truly 24-hour periods as we know them, but rather those days represent ages or periods of time, some of which can be vast periods of time. So there are different opinions here, and people will argue these. We all should have some sort of an opinion about things like this. We all have an opinion. But we should base our opinion on 2, 3, 4 reasons. In other words, we should have reasons for why we have certain opinions. If someone asks us, why do we think Jesus is truly the Son of God, we ought to have a few reasons to form the basis of our opinion. So if we have an opinion about the age of the universe, the age of creation, when it took place, and having an opinion is important, we ought to do some research, look at some facts, form an opinion, and have a basis for it. So that if we are in a dialogue with somebody, we can engage them. And if someone says, well, how old do you think creation is? When do you think everything happened? I don't know if you want to respond, I don't know. Because somebody might say, why don't you know? Don't you have an opinion? But yet, if you have an opinion, somebody says, why do you believe that? Then you should be able to offer. It may be that it doesn't really matter to me. The only important thing is God created everything. I'm not focused on the number of days and when it happened. I'm focused on what I'm supposed to be doing in my life now and where I'm headed in my relationship with God. And that's a good response. So you unburden yourself from having to have an opinion about everything. But if someone says, why do you think Jesus is the Son of God? Then you should have some reasons on that, and that's important. Why do you believe the gospel? You should have some reasons for believing it. Because we are not supposed to keep our faith to ourselves. We're supposed to share it. And we should be dialoguing with people on our faith. We should be defending Jesus. One of the things we're supposed to do as Christians is share the gospel, but we are to defend Jesus. He no longer is on earth to speak and defend himself. So we are, in essence, his ambassadors. We're his proxies. And we should be defending the faith. And the idea about creation is just a part of the entire story. If it's not important, then you don't have to worry about forming an opinion. But if you want to dialogue with somebody, then you should have reasons for why you believe as you believe. And if you do have a dialogue with somebody, and you're dialoguing with somebody that's a fellow believer in Christ, then you always want to be decent and gentle in your discussions. You're not debating trying to win points. You just are trying to get your point across, and you want to hear someone else's opinion because we can all learn from that. But when we do engage in somebody in discussions, we need to be very respectful. This is not an enemy. This is another human being made in the image of God, and we're just trying to share information. So looking at these various ways to come to a decision or at least an opinion about the age of creation, what happened in a 24-hour day period. Well, maybe it didn't happen in a 24-hour period, but it was disclosed over a 24-hour period. Well, maybe the 24-hour period, the 1 week, was developed as a device on which the creation story was told and related, because it is relatable. Or maybe those days are just markers to indicate vast periods of time. So some things that we think we know. We think we have an idea at this point, to the best of our technical ability, to determine an approximate age for the universe. When I was a teenager, well, I started at 10 years old. I wanted to be an astronomer, so I used to eat, sleep, and breathe things of astronomy. And it seemed like in those years, and that was a while ago, that they reckon the age of the universe may be 11 billion years. So now we're up to almost 14 billion. What happened? We developed the ability to see further into the recesses and the depths of the universe. Not just see with optical telescopes, but with radio telescopes. So we've been able to look further into the depth of the universe and measure it and say that we believe at this point the universe is 13.8 billion years old. However, we believe the universe is expanding, and we're still enhancing our ability to see into the depths. So we'll find that the universe is actually older as we evolve in our technologies, but almost 14 billion years old in age. And then when people look at the age of the earth, they figure it may be 4.5 billion years old. And then people look at animals. They look at the dinosaurs and when they were around, and look at the skeletal remains and dating those. We look at the geological events on the earth. We look at ice ages and prior periods of warming, and we date those to hundreds of millions of years ago. And then we think, how long has Homo sapien been around? How long has man been on earth? And that reaches back many thousands of years. And so we have this kind of information. We have archaeological discoveries of ancient buildings and ancient cities that go back thousands and thousands of years. And then against that backdrop of scientific information, technical information, whether you believe the dating is fairly accurate or not, against the backdrop of that, then you have some that believe, well, the earth and everything else, the universe created in 6 days, and man was created in those 6 days. So man is within 5 days of the age of the universe and the oldest star. So how do people come up with the 24-hour day? Well, they looked at the Hebrew word yom, Y-O-M. And they said, when the Hebrew word yom is used, it connotes, it means a 24-hour day. 24-hour day, period. And then they look at the various genealogies. And the Old Testament is filled with genealogies. The structure, I should say the Old Testament, Genesis is filled with genealogies. The structure itself of Genesis is set up in a structure that says these are the generations of, these are the generations of, and it goes to whether it's talking about generations of Adam or Noah, generations of Shem, generations of Abraham. The structure of Genesis is very organized, and it's based upon the generations of people. So folks went into the generations, the genealogies, and it said, for example, Adam was X number of years old, and when he was X number of years old during that period, during his life, he became the father of. And then that son lived X number of years, and he became the father at a certain time. And so they merely crunched the numbers, and they came up with a number. And the idea was, the belief was that man has been around a little bit over 6,000 years if you add up the genealogies. And if you take Yom, 24-hour period at face value, then man arrived on the scene 6,000 and something years ago, and the earth was created just a few days before that. So it gives you the age of the earth, it gives you the age of the universe within a couple of days. And so they get that 6,000 years. The Orthodox Jews use a similar approach, and they come up with approximate 5,800 years. Now, pretty close. Now, if that's, you can go with that if you want to believe that Yom is always 24 hours, and the genealogies were absolutely complete. They were exhaustive, and every person in the chain of command in that genealogy was presented. When you get to the New Testament, there's no validation about the genealogies being complete and exhaustive. No one in the New Testament added up the numbers and came up with an age. And also, when you look at the word Yom, if you go into the second chapter of Genesis, Yom is not used, in at least one instance, to indicate a 24-hour period. It's used to indicate a longer period than 24 hours. So that violates the idea of Yom being 24 hours. But then when you go with the 6,000 years, then you have to deal with the loose ends of that, such as, why are there buildings in the world that are over 6,000 years old? How do we have oil that we pull out of the earth when oil is the result of an end process of converting plant life and animal life into petroleum from decaying plant and animal life? And that takes a long time. How do we end up with diamonds that result from huge periods of time of material under pressure? How do we end up with coal? How do we have evidence of earlier geological periods in the earth? And why do our observations of the universe tell us that it's billions of years old? How do you reconcile those discrete and different points? Those that talk about a literal 24-hour day will say, well, Adam and Eve were not born, they were created adults. And therefore, by the same reasoning, if an Adam and Eve were created as fully functioning adults, then the universe is created in an adult stage, and the earth was created in an adult stage. what that means is that if that theory is true, then the universe is created at its current age, less 6,000 years. So the universe is created at 13.8 billion years old, and the Earth was created at 4.5 billion years old. But I don't really know how you get the skeletal remains of animals who no longer live. And I find a dinosaur that's 100 million years old, because that means that the dinosaur was never alive if it appears it was that old. So I get confused there, but you're trying to kind of fit things into the framework that support the 6,000 years or the young Earth. The godfather of that theory, based on his book and some research about the guy, was at one time the head of one of the science-related departments at Virginia Tech, back probably in the 1970s, maybe before that. But he is kind of regarded as the grandfather of that new Earth, or the young Earth, I should say. And then you get to the idea that perhaps the 24-hour days were just days of disclosure. So the construct and the creation of everything took place over a longer period of time, but it was revealed to man in a sequence of days. Or the other theory is that it was over a very long period of time, but a literary construct, a framework of using days and approximately a week to frame the story was what was chosen. That makes sense from the perspective that we tend to be grounded on day periods, work days. Even ancient man would have been working, whether it was hunting and gathering or avoiding enemies, during the daylight hours. And so he would have been attuned to the cycle of day and night. And he would know that every day when he gets up that day, he's going to have to do a certain amount of work, which means he's going to have a certain amount of food or he'll perish. And even later, people were akin and accustomed to working during the day, sleeping at night. So they were sensitive to the day-night theme. And then more modern man is used to the work week. In fact, many of our questions and conversations are centered around a 24-hour day period or a work day. Did you have a good day at work today? Did you have a busy week? Do you have a big week planned? And so we are captive to time, and we're captive to days, and we are captive to weeks as a method by which we measure our success and our progress, and we measure our lives. And so it's natural that a story that's framed in terms of days, that it would appeal to us and it would resonate. And it also would be a story that would be easy to remember and easy to tell, to share the story. Because if the creation story was many thousands or millions of years ago, that was well before man was able to read and write. And so he would be carrying these stories with him and then sharing those with his family and his sons and his daughters, and they would do the same thing. So if you had a literary framework with which people were already familiar, the cycle of life, then it would fit right in there. Interesting thing also about God and time. Time did not exist prior to creation. God created time. God is not subject to, he is not bound by, he is not beholding to time. Time does not affect him. He's outside time. So when we lock God into a creation story that's based on 24-hour periods of time, we're making God bound by something that he created. We're making God subject to or captive to time, which he created and he's outside of. So we're making him subservient to something that dictates our lives, but does not dictate him. And when we look at the scriptures, we see in the Old and New Testament the phrase that basically 1,000 years is like a day to God, and a day is like 1,000 years, meaning he's immune, or time is not germane or material to him. So if we're saying that he created things in 24-hour periods of time, then we're making him subject to time. And I think we're bringing him down to our size. And we're sharing our limitations with him. That's just a personal opinion. But when we get into the question of how long has the universe existed, how long has man been here, you've got a certain amount of scientific and technical evidence, none of which is going to be 100% accurate, but you do have that, and you have to consider it. But you need to have reasons for why you believe as you believe. The important thing is for us to believe that God created everything. And he holds our future, he holds our lives in his hand, and he's a loving God. It's been said that when you look at science and you look at religion, our faith, they're often positioned as being in conflict. Now, if science denies God, if science denies God as the creator, then there is an irreconcilable conflict between science and religion. Because science then denies the basis for religion, basis for faith. However, if science does not deny God, if science does not deny God as the creator, it can't prove he's God. It cannot prove he's the creator. But if it will not go so far as to deny the existence of God and deny the existence of God as the creator, if then what science tries to do is understand the details of what God did, to describe it and explain it. This is what he did. This is how he did it. Then there's no conflict between science and religion, and they complement each other. So our faith, our religion really deals with the who, some of the what, and the why. And then science can work on figuring out the whens and the hows, the details, the things that you would expect to see in a scientific or mathematical book. I think we should always remember that the account we have in Genesis is an ancient account. And it was written by and read by and studied by and used by people who lived a long time ago, not just people who live today in this year and this month. And so we should not be arrogant to believe that the story of creation should be written to satisfy our modern scientific needs and quests and our urges. It was written and used by pre-scientific people for a long time. We are the scientific people. And we'll have frustration when we take our scientific questions and seek to extract scientific answers from the historical narrative account that we have of God disclosing what he did. So many people seek information from Genesis that it was never designed to provide. And as a result, they become frustrated. It's okay to seek the information, but we should not base our satisfaction with the Genesis account on whether it answers our modern questions. We should seek to understand God, to know what he did, why he did it, and to understand his purposes for us, our families, our lives. And if we do that, then we can walk away without having a full scientific explanation of Genesis, and we won't be frustrated. In the name of God, amen.